Thomas Walker had been standing guard at Buckingham Palace for 15 years. Every morning at 6 sharp he would put on his red uniform, adjust his tall black hat, and take his position by the palace gates. He knew every stone of those ancient walls, every face of the tourists who came to take pictures, and every routine of the royal family. Thomas was 42 years old and had dedicated his entire adult life to serving the crown. His father had been a palace guard before him, and his grandfather too. It was a family tradition that filled him with pride. Standing motionless for hours, rain or shine, was not just his job, it was his calling. But lately, things had been different. Thomas's wife Sarah had been sick for months. The doctors said it was serious, something about her heart that required expensive treatment. The medical bills were piling up, and their savings were running low. Sarah couldn't work anymore, and Thomas's salary as a palace guard, while steady, wasn't enough to cover everything they needed. Every night, Thomas would come home exhausted from standing all day, only to find Sarah looking weaker than before. She would smile and ask about his day, but he could see the worry in her eyes. She knew they were struggling financially, and she felt guilty about the medical expenses. Thomas tried to stay strong for her, but inside he was breaking. The worst part was that Thomas couldn't focus on his duties like before. His mind would wander to unpaid bills and doctor appointments. Sometimes he would catch himself shifting from foot to foot or looking at his watch, things that a proper palace guard should never do. His colleagues noticed but said nothing. They all respected Thomas and knew he was going through a difficult time. One particularly cold morning in November, Thomas stood at his usual post near the main entrance. The tourists were fewer because of the weather, and the palace grounds felt unusually quiet. He had been there since dawn and his feet were beginning to ache. More than that, his heart was heavy. The night before, Sarah had collapsed in their kitchen and they had rushed to the hospital. The doctor said she needed surgery soon, but it would cost more money than they had. Thomas tried to push these thoughts away and focus on his duty. He straightened his shoulders and fixed his eyes ahead, just as he had been trained to do years ago. The palace behind him stood grand and powerful, a symbol of centuries of tradition and service. He was part of that tradition, a small but important piece of something much larger than himself. As the morning progressed, Thomas noticed a black car approaching the palace gates. It was one of the royal vehicles returning from what looked like a school run. Through the slightly tinted windows, he could see the familiar faces of Prince William and his children. The car slowed down as it approached the security checkpoint. Prince George, now 11 years old, was sitting by the window. The young prince had grown taller over the past year, and his face was beginning to lose its childish roundness. Thomas had watched him grow up from a distance, seeing him come and go from the palace countless times. The boy always seemed well-behaved and polite, though Thomas had never had any direct interaction with him. As the car came to a complete stop for the routine security check, Prince George looked out of his window. His eyes met Thomas's for just a moment. Most people, even royals, would simply look past the guards as if they were part of the furniture. But something was different about the way Prince George looked at him that morning. The young prince seemed to study Thomas's face with an intensity that was unusual for a child his age. Thomas maintained his professional composure, keeping his expression neutral and his posture straight. But there was something in Prince George's gaze that felt almost knowing, as if the boy could sense the weight Thomas was carrying. After a few seconds that felt much longer, the security check was complete, and the car began to move through the gates. Thomas expected Prince George to look away and forget about him, as people usually did. Instead, the young prince continued to watch him through the rear window as the car drove away. Thomas felt a strange mixture of emotions. He was touched that the young prince had actually seen him, really seen him, as more than just a statue in a uniform. At the same time, he felt embarrassed, wondering if his personal struggles were somehow visible on his face despite his training to remain expressionless. The rest of that day passed slowly. Thomas completed his shift and returned home to find Sarah sleeping peacefully in their small living room chair. The medication made her tired, but at least she wasn't in pain. He sat down quietly beside her and watched her breathe, thinking about the morning's brief encounter with Prince George. That night, as he lay in bed next to his wife, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened during those few seconds of eye contact with the young prince. It wasn't just that Prince George had looked at him, it was the way he had looked, with such genuine attention and what seemed like understanding. Thomas had served the royal family faithfully for 15 years, always maintaining the proper distance and respect that his position required. He had never expected any personal recognition or acknowledgement. That wasn't what being a palace guard was about. But that brief moment of human connection had touched something deep inside him, reminding him that behind all the ceremony and tradition, they were all just people trying to do their best in difficult circumstances. As he drifted off to sleep, Thomas wondered if he would ever have another interaction with Prince George, or if this morning's moment would remain a small private memory that only he would remember. He had no way of knowing that this encounter was just the beginning of something that would change his life forever. 3 days after that meaningful glance, Prince George found himself unable to stop thinking about the guard he had seen at the palace gates. The man's face had stayed with him in a way that surprised the 11-year-old prince. There had been something in the guard's eyes that looked different from the others, a sadness that seemed deeper than just the tiredness that came from standing all day. Prince George had grown up around palace, staff and security personnel his entire life. He was taught from an early age to be respectful and polite to everyone who worked at the palace, regardless of their position. His parents, Prince William and Catherine, had always emphasized the importance of treating all people with dignity and kindness. But this was the first time that Prince George had felt personally moved by what he saw in someone's face. That evening at dinner, Prince George was quieter than usual. Princess Charlotte noticed first, as siblings often do. She kicked his leg gently under the table and whispered, "What's wrong with you? You look weird." Prince Louis, being the youngest, was too busy trying to eat his vegetables without actually tasting them to notice anything unusual. Prince William looked up from his plate and studied his eldest son's expression. "Everything all right, George? You seem a bit distant tonight." The prince had learned to read his children's moods carefully, knowing that even small worries could feel enormous to young minds. Prince George hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure how to put his feelings into words. "Dad, do you ever notice the guards when we drive through the palace gates? I mean, really notice them, not just see them standing there." The question caught Prince William off guard. It wasn't what he had expected his son to ask about. "Well, yes, of course I notice them. They're there to protect us and the palace. Why do you ask?" "There was one guard the other day who looked sad, really sad. Not just tired, but like something bad was happening to him." Prince George struggled to find the right words to explain what he had seen. "It made me feel strange inside, like I wanted to help but didn't know how." Catherine put down her fork and looked at her son with interest. She had always been impressed by George's sensitivity to other people's emotions, even at his young age. "That shows you have a kind heart, George. It's good that you notice when people might be struggling, but remember, we don't always know what's going on in someone's life just by looking at them. But what if he really is sad about something? What if something terrible is happening to him?" Prince George's voice carried a note of genuine concern that touched both his parents. "We have so much, and if he's one of our guards, shouldn't we care about whether he's okay?" Prince William exchanged a meaningful look with his wife. They had both hoped to raise their children with empathy and social awareness, but sometimes they were still surprised by the depth of their eldest son's compassion. "You're absolutely right, George. We should care about the people who work for us and with us. They're not just employees, they're people with their own lives and challenges." That night, after the children were in bed, Prince William and Catherine talked about their son's observation. They decided that it wouldn't hurt to make some discreet inquiries about the welfare of their security staff. Catherine suggested that perhaps they could arrange for someone to check if any of the guards were facing particular difficulties. Meanwhile, Thomas Walker was having another sleepless night. Sarah's condition had worsened, and the doctors were now saying that the surgery couldn't wait much longer. Thomas had spent the evening on the phone with insurance companies and hospital billing departments, trying to work out payment plans and options. Every conversation ended the same way. They needed a substantial amount of money up front, money that Thomas simply didn't have. Sarah had been sleeping poorly too, and Thomas could hear her tossing and turning in the bed beside him. He knew she was worried about the financial burden her illness was placing on their family. They had been married for 18 years, and never once had she complained about the modest lifestyle that came with his career choice. She had always been proud of his service to the crown, even when it meant they couldn't afford the luxuries that some of their friends enjoyed. "Thomas," Sarah whispered in the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes, love." "Can't sleep either?" "I've been thinking. Maybe we should consider taking out a loan against the house. I know you don't want to, but if it means getting the surgery sooner." Her voice trailed off. They both knew that their small house was their only real asset, and putting it at risk felt terrifying. Thomas reached over and took her hand. It felt thinner than it used to and cooler. "Let's not make any big decisions when we're both tired and worried. Tomorrow I'll call a few more places, see if there are any other options we haven't explored yet." But even as he said it, Thomas knew they were running out of alternatives. He had already looked into every assistance program, every charity, every possible source of help. His pride had prevented him from asking his colleagues for money, and his family didn't have the means to help with such a large amount. The next morning, Thomas dressed for work with the same care he always took with his uniform. Despite everything happening in his personal life, he was determined to maintain his professional standards. The uniform represented something bigger than himself, and he owed it to that tradition to do his job properly, no matter what else was going on. As he walked through the palace grounds to his assigned post, Thomas noticed that the head of security, Major Richardson, was speaking with one of the senior palace staff members. They looked up as he passed and nodded politely. Thomas nodded back, wondering briefly if there was some special event or security concern he should know about. What Thomas didn't know was that Major Richardson had received an unusual request the day before. Someone from the royal household had asked him to provide a confidential report on the well-being of the palace guards, particularly noting if any of them seemed to be facing personal difficulties. It was an unusual request, but not unprecedented. The royal family had a long history of caring for their staff, though such inquiries were typically handled very discreetly. As Thomas took his position at the gates, he tried to clear his mind and focus on the day ahead. He had no idea that his brief eye contact with Prince George 3 days earlier had set in motion a chain of events that would soon change everything for him and Sarah. The young prince's moment of genuine human concern was about to transform from a simple observation into something much more powerful and life-changing. Major Richardson was a man who had seen many things during his 25 years in the military and 10 years as head of palace security. He had learned to read people quickly and accurately, a skill that had served him well in both careers. When he received the request to assess the well-being of the guards, he took it seriously. The royal family's concern for their staff wasn't just good public relations. It was genuine care that had been part of the palace culture for generations. Over the next few days, Major Richardson began paying closer attention to his guards during their shifts. He watched their posture, their alertness levels, and their interactions with each other. Most of the guards appeared to be functioning normally, maintaining the high standards expected of palace security. But when he observed Thomas Walker, Richardson noticed subtle signs that concerned him. Thomas was still performing his duties adequately, but there were small changes in his behavior that an experienced eye could detect. He seemed to shift his weight more often than usual, suggesting discomfort or distraction. His usual perfect posture occasionally slumped slightly when he thought no one was looking. Most telling of all, Richardson noticed that Thomas's eyes, which should have been constantly scanning for potential threats, sometimes seemed focused on something far away. Richardson decided to do some discreet investigating. He pulled Thomas's personnel file and reviewed his performance records. What he found was exemplary. 15 years of perfect attendance, commendations for dedication, and not a single disciplinary action. Thomas Walker was exactly the kind of guard the palace valued most. Reliable, professional, and completely trustworthy. But Richardson also noticed that Thomas had never taken any of his accumulated sick days or personal leave. In 15 years, he had only taken time off for mandatory training and his annual 2-week vacation. This level of dedication was admirable, but it also suggested that Thomas might be reluctant to ask for help or admit to any difficulties. Richardson decided to have a casual conversation with some of the other guards who worked closely with Thomas. He approached Sergeant Mills, a veteran guard who had worked alongside Thomas for 8 years. "Mills, I'm doing some routine welfare checks on the team. How's everyone holding up?" "Any concerns I should know about?" Richardson kept his tone casual. not wanting to suggest that anyone was in trouble. Sergeant Mills hesitated for a moment. "Well, sir, most of the lads are doing fine. Good morale overall, but—" He paused, clearly weighing whether to continue. "But what, Mills? Speak freely." "It's Walker, sir, Thomas. He's been different lately. Still does his job perfectly, mind you, but he seems, I don't know how to put it, heavier somehow. Like he's carrying something that's wearing him down. A few of us have noticed, but he's not the type to talk about personal matters." Richardson nodded thoughtfully. "Any idea what might be troubling him?" "We think it might be his wife, sir, Sarah. She's been ill for some time now. Walker never complains or asks for special treatment, but sometimes we see him checking his phone during breaks more than usual. He looks worried when he thinks no one's watching." This information confirmed Richardson's suspicions. He knew that serious illness in a family could create enormous stress, both emotional and financial. Palace guards were well paid by government standards, but medical emergencies could still create significant hardship for families living on a single income. Richardson made a decision. He would approach Thomas directly but carefully. The last thing he wanted was for Thomas to feel that his job was in jeopardy or that he was being singled out for poor performance. The next morning, Richardson found Thomas at the end of his shift. "Walker, could I have a word with you in my office when you're finished here?" Thomas felt his stomach drop. In 15 years, he had never been called to the head of security's office except for routine matters like annual reviews or briefings about new procedures. "Of course, sir. Is there anything specific I should prepare for?" "Nothing formal, just a quick chat." Richardson's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. 20 minutes later, Thomas knocked on Richardson's office door, his mind racing through possible reasons for the meeting. Had his recent distraction been more obvious than he thought? Had he made some mistake he wasn't aware of? "Come in, Walker. Have a seat." Richardson gestured to the chair across from his desk. "First, let me say that this conversation is completely off the record. Nothing we discuss here will go in your file or affect your employment in any way." Thomas felt slightly relieved, but still nervous. "Thank you, sir. Walker, you've been with us for 15 years. Your record is spotless, and you're one of our most reliable guards. But lately I've noticed that you seem to be under some strain. I want you to know that if there's anything affecting your ability to do your job, or if you need any kind of support, the Palace has resources available." Thomas sat quietly for a moment, unsure how to respond. His natural instinct was to say that everything was fine, that he could handle whatever problems he was facing. But looking at Richardson's kind but serious expression, he felt something crack inside him. "Sir, my wife is very ill. She needs surgery, and the medical costs are substantial. But I want to assure you that my personal situation won't affect my duties. I'm committed to maintaining the standards you expect." Richardson leaned forward slightly. "Walker, how long have you been dealing with this situation?" "Several months now, sir. Sarah's condition has been getting worse, and the doctors say the surgery can't wait much longer." Thomas's voice was steady, but Richardson could see the strain in his eyes. "And you've been carrying this burden alone, continuing to work full shifts, never asking for help or time off?" "It's my responsibility, sir." "Sarah is my wife, and this job is how I provide for her. I can't let either of them down." Richardson was quiet for a moment, thinking about the report he would need to write and wondering how best to help without making Thomas feel like a charity case. "Walker, you said the Palace has resources available, and I meant that. We have an employee assistance fund for situations exactly like this. It's not charity. It's part of your benefits as a long-term employee." Thomas looked up in surprise. "I wasn't aware of any such fund, sir. It's not widely publicized because we don't want people to feel entitled to it, but it exists for dedicated employees facing genuine hardship through no fault of their own. Would you be interested in learning more about it?" For the first time in months, Thomas felt a glimmer of hope. "Yes, sir. I would be very grateful for any information you could provide." What neither Thomas nor Richardson knew was that Prince George had asked his father that very morning if there had been any news about the sad guard he had noticed. Prince William had promised to look into it. And this conversation was happening partly because an 11-year-old boy had cared enough to notice one person's pain among the hundreds of people he encountered each day. That evening, Thomas walked home with a lightness in his step that he hadn't felt in months. Major Richardson had given him several documents about the Employee Assistance Fund, along with the contact information for someone who could help him navigate the application process. For the first time since Sarah's diagnosis, Thomas allowed himself to feel genuinely hopeful. When he opened the front door of their small terraced house, he found Sarah in the kitchen slowly preparing dinner. She moved carefully, stopping frequently to rest, but she was determined to maintain some sense of normalcy in their daily routine. "You're home earlier than usual," Sarah observed, looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. "And you look different. Something good happened today?" Thomas set down his bag and walked over to his wife, gently taking the knife from her hands and guiding her to a chair. "Let me finish that. And yes, something very good happened today." He began telling her about his conversation with Major Richardson, watching as hope began to replace the worry that had lived in her eyes for so long. Sarah listened quietly, her hand covering her mouth in amazement. "Thomas, do you really think they'll approve it? The full amount for the surgery?" Richardson seemed confident that my case would qualify. "Apparently the fund is specifically designed for situations like ours, long-term employees facing medical emergencies." Thomas continued chopping vegetables as he spoke, finding comfort in the simple domestic task. He said they've helped other staff members before and that it's not a loan. It's assistance that doesn't need to be repaid. For the first time in months, Sarah began to cry, but these were tears of relief rather than despair. "I can't believe it. After all these months of worrying, of trying to figure out how we could possibly manage." Thomas knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. "We're going to get through this, love. You're going to get the surgery you need, and you're going to get better." Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Prince George was helping his younger siblings with their homework when his father entered the room. Prince William had just finished a phone call with Major Richardson, who had updated him on the situation with Thomas Walker. "George, could I speak with you for a moment?" Prince William asked, settling into a chair near where his son was working. Prince George looked up from the math problems he was helping Princess Charlotte solve. "Did you find out about the guard? The one who looked sad?" "Yes, I did. And I think you'll be interested to hear what we discovered." Prince William explained, in age-appropriate terms, that the guard was indeed facing a difficult situation with his wife's illness, but that the palace was able to help. "Your observation led to us finding out that he needed assistance, and now we're able to provide it." Prince George's face lit up with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. So he was really sad about something important. "Will his wife be okay now?" "We believe so. She'll be able to get the medical treatment she needs." Prince William paused, studying his son's expression. "You know, George, what happened here is quite remarkable. You notice someone's pain when many people might have simply looked past him. That kind of awareness and compassion is exactly what being in our position should be about." "I just felt sorry for him," Prince George said simply. "He looked like how I feel when I'm worried about something, but much worse. I thought maybe he needed help but was too polite to ask for it." Prince William was struck by his 11-year-old son's insight. That's exactly what was happening. Sometimes people who work for us feel that they can't ask for help because they don't want to seem like they're not doing their jobs well. "That's silly," Princess Charlotte chimed in from across the table, having overheard the conversation. "If someone needs help, they should just ask for it." "It's not always that simple, Charlotte," Prince George replied, with a wisdom that surprised his father. "Sometimes people are afraid that asking for help will make them look weak or cause problems, especially if they work for important people." That night, as Prince William tucked George into bed, he reflected on his son's natural empathy and emotional intelligence. "I'm proud of you for noticing that guard and caring enough to ask about him," he told his eldest son. "You may have saved his wife's life by speaking up." Prince George thought about this as he settled under his covers. "Dad, do you think there are other people working at the palace who might be sad or worried about things but not telling anyone?" "Possibly. Why do you ask?" "Maybe we should pay more attention. Not in a nosy way, but in a caring way. Like how Mom always notices when we're upset even when we try to hide it." Prince William smiled at his son's suggestion. "That's a very good idea, George. Perhaps we could make sure that people know it's okay to ask for help when they need it." The next morning, Thomas arrived at work to find a message asking him to see Richardson again. This time, he felt no anxiety about the meeting. When he knocked on the office door, Richardson greeted him with a genuine smile. "Walker, I have excellent news. Your application for assistance has been approved. The fund will cover the full cost of your wife's surgery, plus additional support for recovery expenses. Richardson handed Thomas an official letter with the details. Thomas stared at the document, reading the numbers several times to make sure he understood correctly. The amount was exactly what they needed, enough for the surgery, the hospital stay, and the follow-up care that Sarah would require. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. This changes everything for us. Thomas's voice was thick with emotion. You don't need to thank me, Walker. You've earned this through 15 years of dedicated service. The only thing we ask is that you take the time you need to care for your wife during her surgery and recovery. We can arrange for temporary coverage of your duties. As Thomas left Richardson's office, he felt as though an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For months, he had been carrying the burden of his wife's illness and their financial crisis alone, trying to maintain his professional composure while his personal world was falling apart. Now suddenly everything had changed. What Thomas still didn't know was that his life had been transformed by the simple act of an 11-year-old boy who had looked at him with genuine human concern and refused to forget what he had seen. Prince George's quiet but powerful gesture of caring had set in motion a chain of events that would not only save Sarah's life, but would also restore Thomas's faith in the fundamental goodness of the people he served. Sarah's surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Thomas had arranged to take his first extended leave in 15 years, and his colleagues had rallied around to ensure his duties were covered without any issues. The night before the operation, Thomas and Sarah sat together in their living room, holding hands and talking quietly about their hopes for the future. I keep thinking this might all be a dream, Sarah whispered. After months of feeling like we were drowning, suddenly everything has changed. The doctors say the surgery has an excellent success rate and we don't have to worry about the cost. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. It's real, love. Tomorrow you're going to get the treatment you need and then we can start looking forward to getting our lives back to normal. Thomas, I want you to promise me something. Sarah turned to face him fully. After I recover, I want us to find a way to thank the people who made this possible. Not just Major Richardson, but whoever it was that decided the palace should help its employees this way. Of course, though I'm not sure how a palace guard goes about thanking the royal family for their kindness. We'll find a way, Sarah said with determination. Maybe we can't thank them directly, but we can make sure we pass this kindness on to others who need help. The surgery went perfectly. Sarah's heart specialist was able to repair the damage that had been threatening her life, and her recovery progressed faster than anyone had expected. Thomas spent every day at the hospital, reading to her, bringing her favorite foods, and simply being present as she healed. During these quiet days at Sarah's bedside, Thomas had time to reflect on everything that had happened. He thought about how close they had come to losing everything, and how the kindness of strangers had saved them. He also found himself thinking about the small moments that had led to this miracle, particularly that brief eye contact with young Prince George that had started the whole chain of events. 3 weeks after the surgery, Sarah was well enough to come home. Thomas had arranged to return to work gradually, starting with shorter shifts while Sarah continued her recovery. On his first day back, he noticed that several of his colleagues greeted him with warm smiles and genuine interest in how Sarah was doing. "Walker," called out Sergeant Mills as Thomas approached the main gates. "Good to have you back, mate. How's Sarah feeling?" "Much better, thank you. The doctors say her recovery is going exceptionally well." Thomas was touched by his colleagues' concern. "I can't tell you how much it meant to know that you all had my duties covered while I was away." "That's what we do for each other," Mills replied simply. "Besides, Major Richardson made it clear that supporting you was a priority for everyone." As Thomas took his position at the gates, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for his work and his colleagues that went beyond anything he had experienced before. The crisis had shown him that he wasn't just an employee. He was part of a community that cared about its members. Around midday, Thomas noticed a familiar black car approaching the palace gates. As it slowed for the security check, he could see Prince George in his usual seat by the window. The young prince looked out and immediately spotted Thomas at his post. This time, instead of the worried, distant look that Thomas remembered from their previous encounter, Prince George's face lit up with what appeared to be recognition and something that looked like relief. The boy studied Thomas's face carefully, and Thomas could sense that Prince George was assessing whether he looked better than he had before. For a brief moment, their eyes met again. Thomas, overwhelmed with gratitude for the chain of events that he didn't fully understand, but somehow sensed was connected to this young prince, did something he had never done in 15 years of palace duty. He gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement and allowed the corner of his mouth to turn up in the faintest smile. Prince George's face broke into a brilliant grin. He raised his hand in a small, discreet wave that only Thomas could see, then pressed his palm against the car window as if to say, "I'm glad you're okay." As the car drove through the gates, Thomas felt his heart swell with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Somehow this 11-year-old boy had seen his pain, cared enough to do something about it, and now seemed genuinely happy to see that he was better. It was a moment of pure human connection that transcended all the formal boundaries of royal protocol. That evening, Thomas told Sarah about the encounter. "I think Prince George knows," he said as they sat in their garden enjoying the mild autumn weather. "I can't explain how or why, but I believe that young boy is somehow responsible for what happened to us." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering this possibility. "You know, Thomas, there's something beautiful about that idea. A child who has everything seeing someone who needed help and caring enough to do something about it. The thing is," Thomas continued, "he looked so happy to see me today, like he had been worried about me and was relieved to see that I was all right. It was the most extraordinary thing." "Maybe that's what real leadership looks like," Sarah suggested. "Not just having power, but using it to notice and help people who might otherwise be overlooked." That night, Prince George excitedly told his parents about seeing the guard again. "He looked so much better, Dad. He wasn't sad anymore, and he even smiled a little bit when he saw me. I think his wife must be getting better." Prince William exchanged a meaningful look with Catherine. "Yes, George. The guard's wife had her surgery, and she's recovering well. The assistance we were able to provide made all the difference." "I'm really glad," Prince George said sincerely. "It made me feel good to see him looking happy instead of worried." "Do you think he knows that we helped?" "I'm not sure," Prince William replied. "But I think what matters most is that he and his wife are going to be okay. And George, I want you to remember this feeling, the satisfaction that comes from helping someone who needs it. That's one of the most important parts of what we're supposed to do in our positions." As the weeks passed, Thomas's shift schedule returned to normal, and Sarah continued to grow stronger. But something fundamental had changed in Thomas's relationship with his work. He no longer saw himself as just a guard standing at a post. He understood now that he was part of something larger, a tradition of service that went both ways, where loyalty and dedication were met with genuine care and concern. The experience had also changed his perspective on the royal family. They were no longer distant figures in his mind, but real people who cared about those who served them. And at the center of it all was a young prince whose simple act of noticing and caring had transformed 2 lives forever. 6 months after Sarah's surgery, the Walker household had transformed completely. Sarah had not only recovered but was healthier than she had been in years. The stress of financial worry and illness had lifted, and both she and Thomas seemed to have discovered a new appreciation for life and each other. Sarah had returned to her part-time work at the local library, something she had been forced to give up during her illness. She found immense joy in helping people find books and information, and her colleagues welcomed her back with genuine warmth. The experience of nearly losing everything had given her a deeper empathy for others facing difficulties. "Thomas," Sarah said one evening as they prepared dinner together, "I've been thinking about what we talked about months ago, about finding a way to thank the people who helped us and passing on the kindness we received." Thomas looked up from the potatoes he was peeling. "What did you have in mind?" "Well, I've been talking to some of the other library staff, and we've learned about several families in our community who are struggling with medical bills and other hardships. What if we started a small fund to help them? Nothing as grand as what the palace did for us, but something meaningful." Thomas smiled at his wife's generous spirit. "That's a wonderful idea. We're certainly in a better position to help others now than we've been in years." "And there's something else," Sarah continued, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I want to write a letter to the royal family. Not asking for anything, just expressing our gratitude. Even if they never see it personally, I want them to know how much their kindness meant to us." Over the next few weeks, Sarah carefully crafted a letter that expressed their heartfelt thanks without being presumptuous or overly familiar. She wrote about how the assistance had not only saved her life, but had also restored their faith in the goodness of people and institutions. She mentioned how they planned to honor the gift they had received by helping others in their community. Thomas was initially hesitant about sending the letter. "Sarah, I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to contact the royal family directly. There are protocols, proper channels. This isn't about your job, Thomas. This is about one human being thanking other human beings for an act of extraordinary kindness. Surely there's nothing inappropriate about gratitude." Thomas realized his wife was right. After 15 years of maintaining professional distance, it felt strange to express personal feelings to his employers. But what they had experienced went beyond the normal bounds of employment. It was about compassion and humanity. Meanwhile, Prince George had continued to think about Thomas and the impact of that first moment when he had noticed the guard's sadness. The experience had awakened something in the young prince, a heightened awareness of the people around him and their potential struggles. During a family dinner, Prince George surprised his parents with an announcement. "I want to do something special for my birthday this year instead of just having a party." Catherine looked at her eldest son with interest. "What did you have in mind, George?" "I want to invite some of the palace staff and their families to have tea with us. Not the important people who always get invited to things, but the people who work hard but don't usually get recognized, like the guards and the cleaning staff and the people who work in the kitchens." Prince William set down his fork, genuinely impressed by his son's suggestion. "That's a very thoughtful idea, George. What made you think of it?" "Well, I keep thinking about that guard and how he looked so worried for so long. I realize that there are probably lots of people who work at the palace that I see every day, but don't really know anything about. Maybe they have interesting stories or need to know that someone notices them." Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis both looked at their older brother with newfound respect. "Can we help plan it?" Charlotte asked eagerly. "Of course," Prince George replied. "We could ask them about their families and their hobbies. Maybe some of them have children who would like to play with us." Catherine and William exchanged proud glances. Their efforts to raise empathetic, socially conscious children were clearly bearing fruit. "I think we can arrange something like that," Catherine said. "It would be a lovely way to celebrate your birthday." When Sarah's letter finally made its way through the proper channels to reach the royal household, it created quite a stir. Prince William read it aloud to Catherine and the children during one of their family meetings. The letter read, in part, "Your Royal Highnesses, my husband Thomas Walker has served as a palace guard for 15 years, and I want you to know that your recent kindness to our family during my medical crisis has been nothing short of miraculous. The assistance we received didn't just save my life. It restored our faith in the fundamental goodness of people and institutions. We will spend the rest of our lives trying to pass on the compassion you showed us to others in our community who need help." Prince George listened intently as his father read the letter. When Prince William finished, the boy asked quietly, "Is that from the guard I noticed? The one who looked so sad?" "Yes, George. This is from his wife thanking us for helping with her medical treatment." "She sounds really nice," Prince George observed. "Dad, do you think they could come to my birthday tea? I'd like to meet her and tell her I'm glad she's better." Prince William looked at his son with amazement. "George, that's a wonderful idea. I think they would be honored to join us." As plans for Prince George's birthday celebration began to take shape, Major Richardson was asked to discreetly invite a select group of long-serving palace staff members and their families. When Thomas received the invitation, he could hardly believe it. "Sarah, you need to see this," he called from their front hallway where he stood holding an elegant envelope with the royal seal. Sarah hurried over, and they read the invitation together. It was personally signed by Prince George and invited Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Walker to join the prince for afternoon tea in celebration of his 12th birthday. "In recognition of dedicated service and with gratitude for your contributions to our palace community." "Thomas," Sarah whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Do you think this is because of my letter?" "I don't know," Thomas replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "But I think we're about to meet the young man who changed our lives." The invitation marked the beginning of what would become the most meaningful day in Thomas Walker's 15-year career at the palace. For the first time, he would step out of his role as a silent guardian and into a personal connection with the family he had served so faithfully for so long. And at the center of it all would be a 12-year-old prince whose simple act of noticing and caring had created ripples of kindness that continued to spread far beyond anything he could have imagined. The morning of Prince George's birthday tea dawned bright and clear. Thomas had taken special care with his appearance, though he wouldn't be wearing his guard uniform for this occasion. Instead, he had chosen his best suit, the one he had worn to his wedding 18 years earlier. Sarah looked radiant in a blue dress that she had bought specifically for the occasion, the first new dress she had purchased in over 2 years. "I'm nervous," Sarah admitted as they approached Kensington Palace in the taxi they had splurged on for the day. "I've never met any members of the royal family before. What if I say something wrong?" Thomas took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Just be yourself, love. They invited us because they wanted to meet us, not because they want us to perform or pretend to be someone we're not." As their taxi pulled up to a different entrance than Thomas usually used for work, they were greeted by a staff member who guided them through beautifully decorated corridors that Thomas had never seen before. The palace felt different when you weren't focused on security protocols and duty rosters. Warmer, more alive, more like a real home where people lived and loved and celebrated important moments. They were led to an elegant but comfortable sitting room where several other families had already gathered. Thomas recognized some of his fellow guards in civilian clothes, looking as nervous and excited as he felt. There were also kitchen staff, housekeepers, gardeners, and maintenance workers, all accompanied by their spouses and children. "Thomas, Sarah." Major Richardson approached them with a warm smile. "I'm so glad you could make it. Sarah, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Thomas speaks of you often." Before Sarah could respond, the doors to the sitting room opened and Prince William and Catherine entered, followed by Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. The room fell quiet as everyone stood, unsure of the proper protocol for such an unusual gathering. Prince George stepped forward, his young face serious but kind. "Thank you all for coming to help me celebrate my birthday. This isn't a formal event. We just wanted to get to know the people who work so hard to make our home function smoothly." Catherine smiled warmly at the assembled group. "Please, everyone sit down and make yourselves comfortable. We've arranged for tea and cakes, and we hope you'll feel free to talk and ask questions. We want this to be enjoyable for everyone." As people began to settle into chairs and conversation started to flow, Prince George made his way directly to where Thomas and Sarah were sitting. Thomas started to stand, but the young prince gestured for him to remain seated. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker," Prince George said, extending his hand to shake theirs in turn. "I'm really glad you could come today. Mrs. Walker, my father told me about your surgery. I'm very happy that you're feeling better now." Sarah was momentarily speechless, struck by the genuine warmth and maturity in the 12-year-old's voice. "Thank you so much, Your Royal Highness. And thank you for everything. I don't know if you understand how much your family's kindness meant to us." Prince George's expression became more serious. "I think I do understand at least a little bit. Mr. Walker, I remember seeing you at the palace gate several months ago. You looked very worried about something important. I'm glad that whatever was troubling you got resolved." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your Royal Highness, I believe you had something to do with that resolution. I may never fully understand how, but I sense that your caring about my situation started a chain of events that saved my wife's life." The young prince looked thoughtful for a moment. "My father says that noticing when people need help is one of the most important things we can do. But I think you would have found a way to help your wife no matter what. You're the kind of person who doesn't give up when someone you love needs you." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Prince George showing genuine interest in Sarah's recovery, Thomas's work, and their plans to help others in their community. The other royal children joined them periodically, and Thomas was struck by how normal and natural the family seemed when they weren't performing official duties. Princess Charlotte asked Sarah about working in a library, fascinated by the idea of helping people find exactly the right book. Prince Louis, though younger, listened attentively to Thomas's descriptions of palace security, asking surprisingly thoughtful questions about what it was like to protect people. As the afternoon progressed, Thomas realized that something profound was happening. The formal barriers that had defined his relationship with the royal family for 15 years were dissolving, replaced by genuine human connection. These weren't distant figures he protected and served. They were people who cared about him and his colleagues as individuals. When it came time to leave, Prince George approached Thomas and Sarah one final time. "I hope we'll see each other again soon. Not just at the palace gates, but like this, where we can actually talk." "We would be honored, Your Royal Highness," Sarah replied. "And please know that we will never forget what your family did for us. We're going to spend the rest of our lives trying to pass that kindness on to others." Prince George smiled broadly. "That's exactly what we hoped you would do. My parents taught me that helping people isn't just about giving them what they need. It's about inspiring them to help others too." As Thomas and Sarah rode home in their taxi, both were quiet for a long time, processing what they had experienced. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Thomas, I think we just met the future King of England, and what struck me most wasn't his title or position. It was his heart." "He saw me," Thomas said softly. "Months ago, when I was drowning in worry and fear, an 11-year-old boy looked at me and really saw me. Not just a guard in a uniform, but a person who was struggling, and he cared enough to do something about it." 6 months later, Thomas made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. After 16 years of faithful service as a palace guard, he submitted his resignation. But it wasn't because he was unhappy or dissatisfied with his work. It was because he had discovered a new calling. The letter he wrote to Major Richardson explained his reasoning. "The kindness I received from the royal family during my wife's illness taught me that there are many ways to serve something larger than yourself. I want to work with families in our community who are facing medical crises and financial hardship. I want to be for others what the palace was for us, a source of hope and practical help when people need it most." The resignation letter also included a request. "I would like to ask if it would be possible for me to meet with Prince George one more time before I leave, to thank him personally for the role he played in changing my life." The meeting was arranged quietly, in the same sitting room where the birthday tea had taken place. Prince George, now 13, listened as Thomas explained his decision to leave palace service in order to help others. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas concluded, "you taught me that noticing and caring about people's struggles is just the beginning. The real impact comes from taking action and inspiring others to do the same. That's what I want to do with the rest of my working life." Prince George was quiet for a moment, then smiled with pride and satisfaction. "Mr. Walker, I think that's exactly what being a true guard means. Protecting and helping people, whether they're behind palace walls or in their own communities. You're not really leaving service, you're expanding it." As Thomas walked away from the palace for the last time as an employee, he carried with him a new understanding of what service truly meant. A young prince's quiet but powerful gesture of noticing and caring had not only saved his wife's life and transformed his perspective, it had set him on a path to spend the rest of his life serving others in a completely new way. "Prince," George watched from a window as Thomas departed, feeling deep satisfaction that his simple act of compassion had grown into something so much larger than he had ever imagined. The guard who had once looked so sad and worried was now walking away with purpose and joy, ready to bring hope to others who needed it most. And in that moment, the future king understood one of the most important lessons of leadership, that the greatest power comes not from commanding others, but from seeing their humanity and responding with genuine care. It was a lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life, just as it had transformed the life of one faithful guard who had simply needed someone to notice his pain and care enough to help.